The spotlight found Michael Jackson before he could even spell his own name. At 5 years old, while other children played with toys and scraped their knees in neighborhood parks, Michael stood on stages in smoky nightclubs, singing his heart out to crowds of adults who saw him as entertainment, not as a child. His father, Joe Jackson, recognized the raw talent in his sons and molded them into a machine built for success. But machines don't need playtime. They don't need friends. They need only to perform. In the cramped house in Gary, Indiana, there was no room for weakness. Joe's belt served as a reminder that mistakes had consequences. The Jackson 5 rehearsed until their feet bled, until their voices cracked from exhaustion, until perfection became the only acceptable standard. Michael, the youngest with the voice of an angel, bore the heaviest burden. He was special, everyone could see that. Special meant more rehearsals, more pressure, more eyes watching every move. While his brothers could steal moments of rebellion, Michael remained trapped in the prison of expectation. He watched through windows as neighborhood kids played games he would never join. He heard their laughter echo through streets he would never walk freely. Fame came quickly for the Jackson 5, and with it came the final destruction of any chance at a normal life. At 11 years old, Michael had 4 #1 hits. At 11 years old, he had also lost forever the simple joy of being anonymous. The world celebrated the Jackson 5's success, but nobody asked what it cost. Nobody wondered what happened to a child's soul when it was packaged and sold before it had time to form. Michael learned early that love and approval were conditional, based entirely on his ability to entertain. When he sang, people cheered. When he danced, they screamed. But when the music stopped, when the lights went dark, he was just a lonely boy in an empty room, wondering if anyone would care about him if he couldn't perform. His mother, Catherine, provided what warmth she could, but even her love couldn't shield him from the grinding machinery of show business. She was devout, religious, and she taught Michael about God and goodness. Yet even her faith couldn't answer the question that haunted him through those early years: why couldn't he just be a regular kid? Why did everything have to hurt so much? The other children at school, when he briefly attended, didn't want to be his friend. They wanted to be near someone famous. They wanted stories to tell. Michael learned quickly to recognize the difference between genuine connection and parasitic interest. It was a skill that would serve him poorly, making him suspicious of everyone, trusting of no one. By the time he was a teenager, Michael had performed in front of millions, earned more money than most people see in a lifetime, and traveled the world. He had everything except the one thing he desperately wanted: the chance to discover who he was without the weight of the world's expectations crushing down on him. The boy in the mirror already looked like a stranger. He had been shaped by forces beyond his control, molded into something that served everyone's needs but his own. The seeds of profound loneliness were planted in those early years, taking root in soil that should have nourished innocence and joy. Instead, they grew into something dark and consuming, a void that no amount of success could ever fill. Michael Jackson was becoming the biggest star in the world, but the person inside that star was disappearing, piece by piece, into a darkness that would follow him forever. The transformation from child star to global phenomenon should have brought happiness. Instead, it brought isolation wrapped in platinum records. The release of Thriller in 1982 didn't just make Michael Jackson famous, it made him a deity in a world that worshipped celebrity. The album sold over 60 million copies. The music videos became cultural events. His moonwalk defied gravity and logic, making millions believe they were witnessing magic. But magic has a price, and Michael paid it in sanity. He could no longer walk down a street. He couldn't go to a movie theater, couldn't browse in a bookstore, couldn't do anything that normal human beings took for granted. Every public appearance required security teams, planned routes, and exit strategies. He became a prisoner of his own success, locked away from the very world that claimed to love him. The adoration was real, but it was the adoration of an image, not a person. Behind the gates of Neverland Ranch, Michael attempted to build the childhood he never had. He constructed amusement park rides, created a private zoo, and filled the property with everything a child might dream of. But he experienced it all as an adult, and the joy was counterfeit. You cannot reclaim what was stolen from you. You can only build monuments to its absence. Neverland became both a sanctuary and a museum of loss, a place where Michael tried desperately to resurrect something that was dead before it had ever truly lived. The plastic surgeries began as minor adjustments but evolved into something darker. Each procedure was an attempt to escape the face that reminded him of his father, the face that belonged to a person he no longer recognized. He wanted to create himself from scratch, to be reborn as something entirely new. But you cannot run from your own reflection forever. The more he changed his appearance, the more the world whispered and speculated. The more they speculated, the more alien he became to them. The man who had once been universally loved was now increasingly seen as strange, disturbing, other. His relationships existed in a realm between reality and performance. He surrounded himself with yes-men, employees who depended on his money and therefore could never offer genuine honesty. His celebrity friends were few, and even they struggled to penetrate the walls he had built. Elizabeth Taylor understood him, perhaps, because she too had been a child star, robbed of normalcy. But even that friendship existed in the rarefied air of fame, disconnected from the earthbound experiences that bond ordinary people together. Michael's romantic relationships confused the world and possibly confused him too. He married Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis, in a union that seemed more symbolic than genuine. Two icons of music royalty joining forces. But the marriage crumbled under the weight of scrutiny and the impossibility of intimacy for someone who had never learned what intimacy truly meant. Later, he married Debbie Rowe, a relationship that seemed transactional, designed primarily to give him the children he desperately wanted. Because Michael did want children. He wanted them with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Perhaps he saw in them a chance at redemption, an opportunity to give someone else the childhood he never had. Perhaps he wanted to prove that he could be a better father than his own had been. Or perhaps he simply wanted someone to love him unconditionally, without the performance, without the music, without any of it. The world that had built him up now watched for his fall. Scandals emerged, allegations surfaced, and the court of public opinion rendered its verdicts before evidence was even presented. Whether the accusations were true or false became almost secondary to the narrative that had formed. Michael Jackson was weird, therefore he must be guilty of something. The presumption of innocence didn't apply to someone who had stopped seeming human. Through it all, Michael kept performing because performing was the only language he truly spoke. On stage, the confusion disappeared. The pain quieted. The loneliness receded. For those hours when the music played and the audience roared, he knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. But then the show would end, and he would return to the silence, to the empty rooms, to the crushing awareness that he was the most famous person on earth and completely, utterly alone. The accusations came like thunderbolts, shattering whatever remained of Michael Jackson's carefully constructed world. In 1993, a 13-year-old boy claimed that Michael had molested him. The news exploded across every media outlet on the planet. The man who sang about healing the world now stood accused of the most heinous crime imaginable. The legal battle that followed was less about truth and more about survival. Michael settled the case for millions of dollars, a decision that would haunt him forever. His lawyers advised him that a trial would be too destructive, too public, too devastating. But in the court of public opinion, settling was an admission of guilt. Innocent people don't pay millions to make problems disappear, the world reasoned. The stain could never be washed away, no matter how many times Michael proclaimed his innocence. The emotional toll was catastrophic. Michael spiraled into prescription drug dependency, using pain medications to numb the agony of existence. The pills helped him sleep, helped him cope, helped him pretend that everything wasn't falling apart. His behavior grew more erratic, his public appearances more bizarre. He dangled his baby over a hotel balcony, desperate to show his child to the fans below, unable to comprehend why the world reacted with horror rather than delight. In 2003, another accusation emerged, and this time there would be no settlement. Michael would face trial, and the entire spectacle would be broadcast for the world to consume. The trial became a circus, with media vans camping outside the courthouse, commentators analyzing every gesture, every outfit, every moment. Michael arrived wearing pajama bottoms one day, clearly too sick to properly dress, and the images circled the globe. The king of pop reduced to this, a broken, medicated man shuffling into a courtroom to defend his freedom. The prosecution painted him as a predator who used his wealth and fame to groom young boys. The defense portrayed him as a damaged soul who had never grown up, whose relationships with children were innocent attempts to experience the childhood he never had. Both narratives contained elements of truth and tragedy. Michael had been destroyed by fame, that much was undeniable. What remained unclear was whether that destruction had turned him into a monster or simply a deeply wounded man. The jury deliberated for days while the world held its breath. When they returned with not guilty verdicts on all counts, Michael's supporters celebrated, and his detractors fumed. But the verdict didn't matter in the ways that counted. Michael Jackson's reputation was destroyed. His finances were in shambles. His health was deteriorating. The trial had been an acquittal in legal terms but a conviction in every other sense. He fled to Bahrain after the trial, seeking refuge in a place where he might be treated like royalty rather than a pariah. But there was no escaping what he had become. The physical transformations had accelerated. His face looked increasingly unnatural, a reconstruction project gone terribly wrong. He was rail-thin, his body withering under the combined assault of stress, medication, and self-neglect. The man who had once been the most electrifying performer in the world could barely complete a sentence without losing his train of thought. His children became his entire world, the only pure thing left in a life corrupted by fame and accusation. Prince, Paris, and Blanket represented hope, the possibility that something good could come from all the pain. He kept their faces covered in public, desperate to give them the privacy he had never known. He told them stories, played with them, tried to be the father he wished he had. But how do you parent when you never learned what healthy parenting looks like? How do you provide stability when your entire existence is chaos? The financial pressures mounted daily. Neverland Ranch, once a symbol of dreams, became a burden he could no longer maintain. The property fell into disrepair, animals were removed, the ride stood silent. It was as if the fantasy itself had died, leaving only the empty structures behind. Michael owed hundreds of millions of dollars. The catalogue of Beatles songs he had purchased, once his greatest asset, was collateral for loans he couldn't repay. Everything was slipping away. Yet through all of this, one truth remained: Michael Jackson could still perform. His body might be failing, his mind might be fractured, his life might be in ruins, but when the music played, something inside him still remembered what it meant to be magical. The announcement of the This Is It concert series should have been a triumphant return. 50 shows at London's O2 Arena. A chance for Michael Jackson to remind the world why he had been crowned the king of pop. Ticket sales shattered records. Fans were ecstatic. The world was ready to forgive, ready to remember the genius before the scandals. But behind the scenes, the reality was far darker than anyone knew. Michael was falling apart. His weight had dropped to dangerous levels. Insomnia tormented him nightly, leaving him exhausted and incoherent during rehearsals. He would show flashes of brilliance, moments when the old magic returned, but they were increasingly rare. The people around him saw a man in crisis but felt powerless to stop the machinery of the concert production. Too much money was at stake. Too many people were employed. Too many tickets had been sold. Enter Dr. Conrad Murray, a cardiologist who became Michael's personal physician. Murray provided something Michael desperately wanted: sleep. Real, deep, unconscious sleep. But the method was unorthodoxly dangerous. Murray administered propofol, a powerful anesthetic used in hospitals, in the bedroom of Michael's rented mansion. Propofol wasn't meant for home use. It wasn't meant to help people sleep. It was meant to knock patients unconscious for surgery, and it required constant monitoring. But Michael didn't care about the risks. He cared only about escaping the torture of sleepless nights. The rehearsals for This Is It captured a man caught between collapse and transcendence. Some footage shows Michael vibrant and engaged, hitting notes and executing moves that seemed impossible for someone in his condition. Other footage reveals a figure who appears lost, confused, barely present. The director pushed forward, convinced that once Michael took the stage in London, everything would come together. It was the same delusion that had followed Michael his entire life: the show must go on, no matter the cost. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson had a rehearsal scheduled for the evening. He spent the morning at home, unable to sleep despite Murray's efforts. The doctor administered various sedatives, each failing to provide relief. Finally, in desperation, Murray gave Michael the propofol he craved. But Murray made a catastrophic error. He left the room. When he returned, Michael wasn't breathing. The king of pop was dying in a bedroom, alone, while his doctor panicked. The 911 call came at 12:21 p.m. Murray claimed he found Michael unresponsive. Paramedics arrived to find a scene of chaos. They attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The damage was done. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at Ronald Reagan Ucla Medical Center at 2:26 p.m. The news spread across the world in minutes. Social media crashed from the traffic. News outlets interrupted regular programming. In millions of homes, people stopped what they were doing and wept for a man they had never met but who had soundtracked their lives. The details emerged slowly, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The extent of Michael's drug dependency. The medical negligence. The enablers who had taken his money while watching him destroy himself. Conrad Murray was eventually convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served less than 2 years in prison. It seemed like an insult, a joke, a price far too small for the loss of an irreplaceable talent. But the larger question haunted everyone: how did we let this happen? How did the most famous person on earth die alone, poisoned by a doctor he paid, in a desperate quest for something as basic as sleep? The answer was uncomfortable. We had all played a role. The fans who demanded perfection. The media that sensationalized his struggles. The industry that profited from his pain. We built Michael Jackson, and then we watched as he crumbled, and most of us did nothing except consume the spectacle of his destruction. The memorial service held at the Staples Center was watched by billions. Celebrities spoke of his genius. His daughter Paris, just 11 years old, stood at the microphone and told the world that her father was the best daddy ever. Her voice cracked with grief, and in that moment, something crystallized. Michael Jackson wasn't just a performer or a scandal or a headline. He was a father. A son. A brother. A human being who had suffered beyond what most people could imagine. The This Is It rehearsal footage was compiled into a documentary that became one of the highest-grossing concert films of all time. Audiences watched in theaters, seeing what could have been, mourning what was lost. Michael looked tired in the footage, but he also looked hopeful, as if maybe, just maybe, this comeback would be the thing that saved him. But there was no salvation coming. There was only the end, arriving exactly when it was least expected and most inevitable. The death of Michael Jackson created a strange phenomenon: instant redemption through tragedy. The same media that had crucified him now canonized him. The same public that had whispered accusations now wept at his loss. Everyone suddenly remembered the music, the dancing, the magic. The controversies were set aside, at least temporarily, in favor of celebrating what he had given to the world. But this revisionism, while understandable, missed something crucial. Michael Jackson didn't need our approval after he died. He needed it while he lived. The estate he left behind was hundreds of millions in debt, yet it became one of the most profitable in entertainment history. His music catalog surged in sales. His image appeared on merchandise. Cirque du Soleil created shows based on his work. Michael Jackson the product became more valuable than Michael Jackson the person had ever been. It was the ultimate cruel irony: he was worth more dead than alive, proving that he had been right all along to feel that people loved what he could give them but not who he actually was. The allegations against him resurfaced periodically, most notably in the documentary Leaving Neverland, which featured detailed accusations from two men. The film reignited fierce debates about Michael's legacy, splitting the public between those who believed the accusers and those who defended Michael's innocence. Radio stations removed his music. Fans protested. The estate filed lawsuits. And through it all, Michael Jackson remained the center of attention, unable to defend himself, unable to explain, unable to find peace even in death. But beneath all the controversy and debate lay a simpler, sadder truth. Michael Jackson was a cautionary tale about the cost of fame. He was proof that talent and success could not insulate someone from pain. He demonstrated that childhood trauma echoed through entire lifetimes, shaping decisions and destroying possibilities. He showed us that loneliness could exist in the middle of crowds, that isolation could be absolute even when surrounded by people claiming to care. His children grew up in the aftermath, trying to honor a father they loved while the world argued about whether he was a monster or a saint. They had his features, his mannerisms, glimpses of his talent. Paris became a model and musician, openly discussing her mental health struggles and suicide attempts. Prince worked behind the scenes in entertainment. Blanket, who changed his name to Bye Guy, stayed out of the spotlight as much as possible. They were testaments to Michael's humanity, proof that despite everything, he had been capable of love and of being loved. The music endured because great art transcends the artist. Billie Jean still makes people move. Man in the Mirror still inspires. Thriller still thrills. The songs exist independently now, divorced from the complicated, tragic figure who created them. People can love the music without reconciling all the contradictions of the man. Perhaps that's the only way it can work. Perhaps that's what Michael would have wanted. Neverland Ranch, his dream paradise, was sold and renamed. The rides were dismantled. The zoo was closed. The fantasy was over. It stands now as a private property, the ghosts of carousel horses and trained elephants haunting a place that represented one man's desperate attempt to reclaim innocence. You can't visit it. You can't see what remains. It's locked away, much like Michael himself had been, hidden from a world that never understood what it was looking at. The greatest tragedy of Michael Jackson's life wasn't the allegations, the addiction, or even the untimely death. It was the profound, unshakable loneliness that consumed him from childhood until his final breath. He performed for billions but connected with almost no one. He was surrounded by people but remained fundamentally alone. He achieved everything a person could achieve and found that it meant nothing without genuine human connection. In the end, Michael Jackson's story asks us difficult questions about what we value and what we're willing to sacrifice for entertainment. It forces us to confront our role in creating the conditions that destroy the people we claim to admire. It reminds us that behind every public figure is a private person, and that person is just as vulnerable, just as human, just as capable of suffering as anyone else. Michael Jackson wanted to heal the world, but he couldn't heal himself. He wanted to make others happy but found no lasting happiness of his own. He wanted to be loved for who he was but could never escape what he represented. The superstar who had everything felt completely alone, and in that loneliness, he found both his greatest art and his ultimate destruction. The music plays on, immortal and untouchable, but the man who made it is gone, having finally escaped the prison of fame into the only true privacy left, the silence of the grave.